Okay, today we're going to try something a little bit different. This is an unusual episode of Fluffy Puppy Philosophy. And with us, as usual, are our hosts, Zohar and Asher, who are students today. And of course, I am their teacher. We're going to be working off of this textbook, Looking at Philosophy by Donald Palmer. It's The Unbearable Heaviness of Philosophy Made Lighter, the second edition. I studied out of this book myself in high school, and we're going to hopefully do a review over the next few months of Descartes' discourse on method and the meditations, Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist, the Epicurean Reader, Consolations of Philosophy by Boethius, John Stuart Mill on utilitarianism, The Last Days of Socrates, Plato, and of the Aristotelian books, we're probably going to touch on Poetics, Politics, and the Nicomachean Ethics. Interesting thing about the Nicomachean Ethics, Nicomachus was the son of Aristotle. Aristotle felt so strongly about the ethic of education that he wrote this entire book for his son to teach his son ethics and morality. Very similar to what I am trying to do for both of you today. Okay?
Yes.
Now, don't give me lip.
I said Professor Rosenberg.
I don't need to be called Professor Rosenberg. You can call me Dad, you can call me whatever you want, but be normal, okay? All right, and I expect questions. And I expect you to pay attention, and I expect you to take notes. There will be quizzes, there will be tests, but those won't be on camera. Now, you asked me earlier why philosophy is called philosophy, and I wanted to start by explaining that. But first, the story of Western philosophy begins in ancient Greece. Now, the Greek word logos designates a certain kind of thinking about the world, a kind of logical analysis that places things in the context of reason and explains them with pure force of thought. Such an intellectual exercise was supposed to lead to wisdom. Now, do you know what the Greek word for wisdom was?
Hold on,
Sophia.
wait a second.
Go ahead.
Greek logos means what?
Logos is a certain type of thinking. It's a philosophical type of thinking. But this is just to answer your question, what the word philosophy means.
So I'm writing it down.
All right? So the word is two words. All right? Sophia, which means wisdom. And those who dedicate themselves to logos were thought of as lovers of wisdom. Hence, philo, which means love. Love of wisdom, philosophy, philosophers. Okay. What was there before philosophy? Before there was this thinking, before logos, there was something called mythos. A certain way of thinking that placed the world in the context of its supernatural origins, mythos. Mythos explained worlds by tracing them to the exceptional, sometimes sacred events that caused the world to be as it is now. In the case of the Greeks, this meant tracing them to the dramatic acts of the gods on Mount Olympus. The narratives describing these origins myths are not only explanatory, but also morally exemplary and ritualistically instructive. What do you think we mean by morally exemplary?
Good moral stuff. Like, morally good.
An example of good morality, yeah. All right. Hence, they're often conservative in nature. They seek to maintain the status quo by replicating origins. So, behaved the sacred ancestors, so must we behave. Tradition. You asked me about this before. So, a key ethic in this idea of mythos is to teach these stories to show you how you're supposed to behave. Our ancestors behaved this way, so must we behave this way. So now myths had the advantage of creating a whole social world in which all acts had meaning. It took out the brain work about coincidence and logic because everything was fated. Now this had the disadvantage of creating static societies, of resisting innovation, and many would say of being false. Then suddenly philosophy happened. Logos broke upon the scene, at least according to the traditional account. There are other accounts, of course, accounts that suggest that Western logos, philosophy and science, is just our version of myth. But let's suppose that something different did take place in Greece about 700 years before the Common Era. We say before the Common Era, you can say before Christ, Jewish home, Jewish terms, BCE for us. Let's suppose that the first philosopher's explanation of the flooding of the Nile River during the summer, most rivers tend to dry up in the summer, was being caused by desert winds. Desert winds, not battles, not love affairs among gods. It really does constitute novelty, this idea. Okay? Natural phenomena are explained by other natural phenomena, not by supernatural events in dream time. In that case, Greece truly is the cradle of Western philosophy. The Greeks were the first people to start saying, hey, the grass is green outside. That doesn't mean that Aphrodite just fell in love again with Ares. It means that, you know, the birds and the bees are pollinating the plants and the trees. It means that if they're getting enough water, they're getting enough fertilizer. Yes?
Is there Eastern philosophy? Or
there is Eastern philosophy. That is a different class, that it has different concepts that I hold very dearly as well, and I would be happy to educate you on Eastern philosophy also. But Western philosophy, that helps understand and explain the underpinnings of our Constitution, of our democratic republic, of our country as a concept, that would be what we're studying right now. And for us, this idea that we have based all other ideas upon begins in Greece, in ancient Greece, 700 years before the Common Era. Okay? Okay. All right. So, why Greece, you're asking, for example, not Egypt or Judea? Well, for one reason, there was no priestly class of censors in Greece. For another, the Greek imagination had always been fertile and concerned with intimate detail. And remember what I'm always telling you about intimate detail. That's how you tell a story. That's how you show your facts. That's how you prove your work. Intimate detail. Something that you have to put forward to show that the proof is yours. Okay? For example, Homer's description of Achilles' shield takes up 4 pages of the Iliad, which has led some scholars to believe that Homer had to have seen this shield. He had to have been there. Or whoever had brought this to Homer had been an eyewitness. So that intimate detail shows us the veracity of a claim.
A lot of pages.
Huh?
That's a lot of details.
That's a lot of pages. Furthermore, the Greeks were particularly aware of change, of the war of opposites, summer to winter, hot to cold, light to dark, and that the most dramatic change of all, what do you think the most dramatic change of all is?
Seasons.
We just said that. More dramatic than that.
Day and night.
Closer, life to death. Indeed, this sensitivity to the transitory nature of all things sometimes led the Greeks to pessimism. We'll explain pessimism next. The poet Simonides wrote, "Generations of men fall like the leaves of the forest." Very sad thought, isn't it? Generations of men fall like the leaves of the forest. I guess, what is he trying to say by saying that?
The generations of people die very quickly.
Yeah, and? What do we learn by that?
Make the most out of life, or?
Memento mori. Life is very fleeting. It's a transitory thing. It's moving forward, and it has a conclusion. Make the most of the time that you have. It also led them to demand an explanation, one that would be obtained and justified not by the authority of religious tradition, but by the sheer powers of human reason. Human reason. That's what we're studying. We're studying the basis of Western philosophy of logos based on human reason. Okay? Here we find an optimism behind the pessimism. The human mind operating on its own devices is able to discover ultimate truths about reality. Well, that's kind of special, isn't it? So who were the first philosophers in ancient Greece? Who are we talking about first, do you think? Who do you know? Do you know of any of the philosophers?
Aristotle.
Very good. He's one of the big ones. Plato, anybody bigger than Aristotle would have been Plato. And who's bigger than Plato? Who's Plato's source? You were about to say him, or I was about to say it. I have a friend who has the same name. Socrates.
You have a friend named Socrates?
I have
That's
a friend
awesome.
It's kind of cool.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Where does Archimedes, what kind of Archimedes?
Archimedes also fits into the philosophy, science
Is that Greek?
realm. Yeah, yeah. He was an ancient Greek also. He was one of the most brilliant minds ever to come out of humanity, in my opinion. Hey, Archimedes. We're talking about your namesake. Okay. Now, before Socrates, there were a group of philosophers called the Pre-Socratics. Pre meaning before, Socratic obviously being Socrates. Socrates is kind of the mile marker that we measure all other philosophy by. Okay? Now, the first dispassionate attempt at such an explanation of what the world is all about was carried out by a guy named Thales of Meletis. Meletis was a tiny little island, I think, or maybe a small town in one of the islands in Greece. This is around 600 years before the Common Era, 580 BC to be more exact. He was the first recorded true philosopher, at least in textbooks today.
Socrates?
Thales. This is before. This is a pre-Socratic. So he is before Socrates. The first guy, Thales, Thales, from a place called Meletis. Meletis. He was a Milesian, in fact.
Why does philosophy have to be such a long word?
Is this boring? I hope I'm not boring you folks. Thales was trying to figure out what substance was the underlying substance of all being. What is stuff? What is stuff made of? What is this? What is all of this? What is my skin? What is this pen made of?
Matter.
What is the air I'm breathing? What matter? Well, we call it matter now. What do you think they called it back 600 years before the Common Era? What do you think Thales thought? They didn't have
magic.
No, see, this is the difference. We talked about that. We're leaving mythos behind. We're moving on to logos. We're beginning science and philosophy. We're beginning to say, let's use our logic, let's use our human reason, let's discover together, let us reason together what matter, what things are made of. And how do we do this without scientific instruments? We have to use our brains, our only computers that we have handy. Okay? So, Thales said, there has to be some substance that is underlying in grass to allow it to be transformed into milk. Well, figure that a cow comes out, he eats the grass, the next thing you know, you're grabbing the cow's udders, you got milk. So Thales understood that there's a cycle here. You know, the cow didn't stay healthy if it didn't eat the grass.
Does the cow not drink?
Well, the cow drinks water too, but the milk was more of a food. It's a substance. You can turn it into cheese. Thales said, cow eats grass, the cow turns it into milk. The cow must convert grass into milk. What makes it? What is this transformation? If there's a change, there must be something big that happens, but it doesn't change. There must be a unity behind the apparent plurality of all things. A oneness disguised by the superficial plurality of the world. Superficial means just on the surface. Plurality means the variety. All of these different, you know what plurality means, right? You know what plural is? Multiple. Right, so plurality, just the whole plurality. I know we're going to use a lot of big vocabulary words to try to help explain this. You can write them down. It's okay. We'll take questions by email as well. Comments. You can comment. We'll do our best. I apologize for my bad posture. You can comment about that. I can't do anything about my face.
Wait, what are some of the
Some of the what?
Big words.
The big words?
How do you spell them?
How do I spell them? Okay. One of the words. Okay, you should write down pessimism.
Oh, wait. I have to figure out how to spell philosophy again.
Just come on. Write small. Pessimism. P-E-S-S-I-M-I-S-M.
P-E-S-S.
P-E-S-S-I-M-I-S-M. Okay?
What does that mean?
Pessimism is a negative view on the outlook of change and the way things will be. It is
negative outlook.
The opposite of optimism. Optimism being the positive outlook on.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so Thales. You wrote down Thales already? Thales of Miletus?
I did. First philosopher was Thales.
Good. Thales. T-H-A-L-E-S of Miletus. M-I-L-E-T.
Wait, how do you spell Thales?
T-H-A-L-E-S. Of Miletus. M-I-L-E-T-U-S. That's his last name for lack of a last name. Everybody came from a place, that's how they were known. Thales of Miletus. M-I-L-E-T-U-S.
Thales. Okay.
Okay. So, like myth makers before him, Thales was familiar with the four elements: air, fire, water, and earth. He assumed that all things must be ultimately reduced to one of these four, because he was like the first monotheists. In fact, the first monotheists came out around the same time. Those people who said that there can't be all of these variety of demons and angels and gods. There must be one great power, one prime mover, one benefactor. He's looking for that one in the scientific basis, the one thing that makes up everything, okay? So what is it? What do you think he thinks it is?
Probably earth or air. Water.
Okay, why?
Well, Earth is it's probably what is most used because, I'm not sure, water.
I mean, Earth's a good idea.
Because you can make things out of it, you walk on it, you eat a lot of it. Things eat dirt. Yeah, things grow from it.
There's probably more carbon in Earth than there is in any of the other elements, and everything's carbon-based for the most part on our planet.
It's the way that
we are.
But he didn't know that.
But he didn't know that. So
it's the way that food is grown.
It's not Earth.
It's not Earth.
All right. What else did you say? Why do you think air?
Because we breathe air, and air blows around Earth, and it takes water. It's water.
It's water. Now tell me why you think it's water.
For how it makes milk? That's what I'm talking about?
Let's start, keep going. Tell me more. What do you think is water? Tell me about water.
It's a liquid. What is the liquid base of milk?
We're looking for the one underlying element that can be the bridge between the plurality of all substances, right?
Because water can be three different things. It
Bingo.
can be solid, gas, and liquid.
You got it. There's that leap. That's the leap of logic, the spark of intellect that proves that philosophy is not in vain. Nice job. Okay. Water turns into ice. It turns into steam. It turns back into water. It turns into air. It can be in the form of air. It can fan fires. He went and made all of these crazy suppositions. All things must be composed of water. Which is interesting because what is the human body but 98% water, right?
What's the other 2%?
At least that's what I was taught in school.
What's the 2%? If we were 98 water, we would be a block.
Sunshine and rainbows.
1% sunshine, 1% rainbows.
Listen, it's
like 70.
pigtails and spices and everything nice.
Apples and spice and everything.
Yep. Well, it's obviously a false conclusion, but it's valued today not for the content of what he said that everything is made of water, because we know it's not all made of water. It's valued for its form. It's not a great leap between the claim that all things are composed of water and the claim that all things are composed of atoms. Which even now people might take issue with and say, well, atoms are composed of electrons, and electrons are composed of quarks, and quarks are composed of subatomic particles.
What's farther than that?
I'm sure there's something that I haven't learned. It's also very important for the presupposition behind it, that there is an ultimate stuff behind appearances that explains change while remaining itself unchanged. Okay? Like a catalyst. Alright? Alright. Still, not all of Thales' contemporaries accepted his formulation. And since there was no TV and there was no radio, all these people had was each other. They loved to get together in the marketplace or wherever, the agora, and they would talk and they would, you know, completely go over all of their ideas as they contemplated them. And so other people, other philosophers would spring up very quickly, and they would all have competing ideas. One such guy was a guy named Anaximander. Anaximander. Anaximander
Sounds like a...
lived between 610 and 546 before the Common Era.
How do you spell that?
And then Aximander.
Does not help.
Anaximander.
X-I-M.
Yeah,
I got it right, except for the
He disagreed with Thales.
Disagreed.
He's around 546 BC, okay? I think Thales was around 30 years before him. Thales was like 576 BC. All right? Remember, when you're going BC, the bigger the numbers get, the further back you go. All right. Now, he said if all things were made of water, then long ago everything would have returned to water. So he asked how water could become its deadly enemy, fire. How a quality could give rise to its opposite.
But fire is not really its deadly enemy because
Sand.
fire. No, fire.
Follow his logic.
Oh, wait.
He can't understand how water can become fire. Based on Thales' interpretation of the existence of all reality, everything is made of water. It is the core element. But if that's true, then that would have to mean that fire is made of water.
But
And Anaximander says that there's no way that fire is made of water.
What is fire made of?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm sure Anaximander asked himself the same thing. So he said the ultimate stuff behind the four elements could not be one of the elements, because it can't have its opposite. It has to be a solo idea. It would have to be an unobservable, unspecific, indeterminate something or other that he called the boundless. The boundless. I like the boundless.
Very cinematic.
Yes. Sometimes he called it the unlimited. The unlimited. Almost sounds like a concept for God. And it would have to be boundless and unlimited and unspecific, because anything specific is opposed to all the other specific things in existence. So water is not fire, which in turn is not air, yet the boundless is opposed to absolutely nothing, because everything comes from the boundless. It is the boundless. Anaximander seemed to have imagined the boundless as originally moving effortlessly in this great cosmic vortex, which was interrupted by some disaster. Does this sound familiar to you guys at all? Yeah, it does kind of sound like the Big Bang, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's amazing. It reminds me of the three monkeys typing on typewriters into infinity, and the expression or the idea that eventually, if they do this for all time, they'll write out something meaningful, like the complete works of Shakespeare or the King James Bible. But the idea is that sometimes philosophy explains science, science explains philosophy, sometimes it parallels each other, and sometimes out of philosophy, using just our human brains and logic, we can come up with basic scientific principles, even though we cannot prove them. Maybe I'm making a big leap here. I don't know. This is just my idea. I like to see the parallels. I like to see all of these dots connecting. So, this idea of some cosmic disaster, a Big Bang if you will, may have caused the four elements to separate off from the vortex. And in one of the few passages remaining to us from a book written by Anaximander, I have a quote, and it says, "From what source things arise, to that they return of necessity when they are destroyed, for they suffer punishment and make reparation to one another for their injustice according to the order of time." I honestly don't know why that's important because I really don't know how to interpret that. There are many possible interpretations of this amazing passage. According to the most dramatic interpretation, the whole world as you and I know it is the result of a cosmic error.
Is that what he said?
That's one interpretation of that passage, that possibly he thinks that this whole Big Bang idea, this cosmic disaster, was just a mistake that wasn't meant to happen. It spawned off all of our reality.
Well,
Creation may just as well be an act of injustice. But justice will be done. The world will eventually be destroyed and things will return to their boundless source and revolve eternally in a vortex. At least that's what Anaximander was sort of saying.
well, I mean, eventually, very long time.
That's
eventually,
what
the sun will,
That's what he was
like,
saying.
supernova. and-
Maybe he's right, maybe he's not. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about philosophy. Nobody's necessarily right and nobody's necessarily wrong. It's all about using your best muscle in your body, your brain. It's about stretching it in different ways so that you can use it again in the future for problem solving. Watching you.
What muscle did you use?
Now that interpretation that the world is eventually going to end contains at least one kind of mythos as logos. It exhibits a bizarre kind of optimism about the triumph of justice, because that is what he says later in his book, apparently, that this whole idea of the world returning back to the vortex is the only way to return to justice. It's a crazy interpretation, but, you know, what did he have to work with? A less radical and less mythical interpretation is this. Once the four elements were created, they became related to one another in antagonistic ways. Antagonistic meaning against each other. But their opposition to one another balances out in an ecological harmony. All right? Because they're opposites, they balance each other like weights on a scale. Okay? If one element dominates at one period, say water in a time of flood, it will later be compensated by the domination of another element at, say, another period, like fire in a drought. So the original unity of the boundless is preserved in this apparent war and balance of opposites, okay? Questions?
So, it has to all be balanced out from, like, the elements.
According to Anaximander, in order to be able to show the boundless, there has to be a balance. The boundless would have to be in balance.
What is Earth?
Wouldn't that bound the boundless?
And limit the unlimited? Again, these guys had a lot of holes in their theories, and that's the fun of being able to study philosophy. We have the luxury of being far flung into the future from these gentlemen and occasionally women who came up with these interesting concepts, and we can sometimes plug holes in their theories, and sometimes we can shoot new ones in there.
What is considered Earth? Like dirt?
According to Anaximander,
Well, all of it.
everything, all matter is the boundless.
No.
According to Thales, all Earth would have been essentially made of the element of water.
Earth, they mean dirt, ground, rock, things like that. That's Earth.
All right.
There's 2 minutes.
Some of Anaximander's followers asked, how much better is an unspecific, indeterminate something or other than nothing at all? They decided that it was no better. In fact, it was the same as nothing at all. And knowing that ex nihilo nihil, which means out of nothing comes nothing, you'll hear this expression often, possibly in life, ex nihilo nihil, that from nothing comes nothing. They went on searching for the mysterious ultimate stuff. Okay? Now the next philosopher, his name's even more difficult to pronounce and spell. His name is Anaximenes.
Can we save this for another?
Let's see, where are we?
Like 20.
We got another minute. Anaximenes. We're gonna finish. A-N, no. I like that you remember the peanut guy. A-N-A-X. I-M-E-N.
Oh, I wasn't listening.
A-N-A-X.
A-N.
Anaximenes. I-M-E-N-E-S. This guy believed it was made of air. Everything's made of air, according to Anaximenes. Now he was a contemporary of Anaximander. He lived around 545 years before the Common Era. And he said that the air we experience, common sense air, is a halfway house between all other forms into which primordial air can be transformed through condensation and rarefication.
Rarefication?
These are like kind of psychobabble words that he chose to express a scientific idea that was not scientific at all.
No.
But his idea is that when air becomes rarefied, it goes into steam, then smoke, then fire, and when it condenses, it turns into mist, water, mud, dirt, and eventually stone. So you see how he's trying to make air the central element in all existence. You see how, in the scale?
Kind of.
So with the condensation and rarefication, Anaximenes introduced the important claim that all differences in quality are really just differences in quantity.
Quantity.
Just more or less stuff packed into a specific set space. What does this sound like to you? It sounds like the way molecules work. The way, if molecules are moving really, really fast, what happens?
That means that they're...
What happens when molecules are stuck tight together?
It means they're a solid.
That's right. And when they're moving really, really, really fluidly?
They're liquid.
There you go. So he's got this idea. And why is that? It's because of the amount of molecules with the space that they have to move around in, right?
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like he's promulgating that same idea. He's putting forth an idea that you take one element still, and depending on the amount of space you give to the little tiny components of that element, it will turn into one of these other ideas, one of these other substances like stone or fire. All right? Now, the first three philosophers, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, are known as the Milesians because all of them came from a small Greek colony of Meletis on the Persian coast, and because they constitute the first school of philosophy. Despite the difference among them, they shared a number of characteristics, some of which would eventually become part of Western scientific tradition. A desire for simple explanations, a reliance on observation to support their theories, a commitment to naturalism, write down naturalism.
What's that mean?
The view that natural phenomena should be explained in terms of other natural phenomena. And monism.
In English.
Just write that down.
Well,
write down naturalism.
Natural stuff should be explained by other natural stuff.
Not by supernatural stuff.
Natural.
If the grass is green, there's a natural explanation for it. It's not because Vulcan is working hard on his forge and his heart is full of love for Aphrodite.
Although it probably is.
I'm sure wherever Vulcan is, he
Okay.
appreciates it.
He's in.
Did you write that down about naturalism?
Yes,
Now,
naturalism.
monism. The other idea is monism, the view that ultimately there is only one kind of stuff. This is like monotheism,
Yeah,
except
it has the symbol.
exactly monism. M-O-N-I-S-M.
M-O-
Monism.
What's it?
M-O-N-I-S-M.
What is it?
It's the belief that there's this wonderful girl named Mona somewhere and she's taking care of
Got
everything.
it.
No, monism is the idea that there's ultimately only one kind of stuff. And it's the best stuff, the greatest stuff.
Kind of
The
stuff.
school of Meletis ended with the tenuous peace between the Greek outpost and Persia collapsing, and the Persians overran the city.
But we will continue more on the next episode.
Next episode, we're going to talk about the Milesians' successor, my favorite and your mother's favorite, Pythagoras. Pythagoras was the gentleman who believed that peanuts were really just tiny little people.
That's amazing.
And he goes off onto a different aspect of...
Do you know the Pythagorean theorem?
I know of it.
It's because of him.
Now,
Yes.
before we conclude, what questions do you have for me? Zara, if you don't have
Can
at
I
least
go to
one
the
question.
bathroom?
No, you have to ask me a question.
Can I
Show
go
me you were
question?
paying attention. Question related to the substance of what we've been discussing.
So, why was the boundless created exactly? To explain what could not be explained. Pretty much.
What is the boundless?
Something that isn't bound.
Have you been paying attention to anything I was saying, or
It's-
were you just waiting for me to finish?
Both.
Fluffy Puppy Gaming out!